The static comes first, a faint hum, a voice crackling across the void, and then that sentence. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. For a moment, time itself seems to stop. In living rooms, classrooms, and bars, across every continent, millions lean closer to their televisions, faces lit by the glow of a black and white world that has suddenly become infinite. The moon, distant, eternal, unreachable, now holds the footprint of a man from Earth. The impossible has happened. Humanity has escaped its cradle. The crowd cheers, the cameras flash, and the voice of Walter Cronkite trembles with awe. It is the triumph of reason, of courage, of human will, the moment that was supposed to define an entire century. But as the noise fades, so does certainty. Because somewhere, behind the applause and the headlines, a quieter question begins to stir. A whisper, born not from evidence, but from doubt. Could something this perfect be real? It was the height of the Cold War, a time when the truth itself was just another weapon. Every image, every word was a performance of power. And in a world where governments lied, cameras deceived, and propaganda ruled the airwaves, even a miracle could start to look like theater. Most people never questioned what they saw that night, but a few couldn't let it go. And that's where our story begins, not on the lunar surface, but in the shadows beneath it. The moon may have been conquered, but the Earth was coming apart. It was the late 1960s, a world wrapped in smoke, secrets, and war. Television screens that once showed astronauts drifting in silence now flickered with jungles burning in Vietnam. For every cheer that rose for Apollo, another shout echoed in protest. The same government that reached for the stars was losing faith on the ground. And in that chaos, belief itself began to fracture. Because in the Cold War, truth wasn't a constant, it was a weapon. Every image, every speech, every number beamed across the airwaves was part of a larger battle for perception. Propaganda didn't just sell wars, it sold worlds. In that kind of world, even miracles came with an asterisk. The moon landing, some said, had been too perfect, the lighting too even, the flag too still. And when people are conditioned to expect manipulation, even awe starts to look like artifice. Most Americans didn't doubt it. They didn't want to. But for a restless few, the questions started to whisper. If the government could lie about Vietnam, what else could it lie about? It wasn't proof they sought. It was power. The power to see through the show, to be the one who knew what others couldn't. And so the seeds of suspicion were planted. Not in science, but in psychology. Not by NASA, but by a nation learning to mistrust itself. In the decades to come, those seeds would take root in strange places. Hollywood studios, dimly lit basements, and eventually, the entire digital world. But before that, it would find its first spark in the place where illusion was born, the silver screen. Before there was doubt, there was cinema. In 1968, a year before humanity set foot on the moon, Stanley Kubrick released 2001, A Space Odyssey. Audiences gasped. They'd never seen space look so real. The slow, graceful rotation of spacecraft, the silence, the cold precision of light, it all felt like truth, crafted on a soundstage. So when the real moon landing aired a year later, some couldn't help but wonder, if Hollywood could fake space this beautifully, why couldn't NASA? That's how suspicion first found its stage lights. Throughout the 1970s, the line between fiction and reality blurred. Americans had seen governments lie, wars televised, presidents fall, and so the film reel, once a window into dreams, became a mirror reflecting distrust. Then came Capricorn One, a thriller about astronauts forced to fake a Mars landing in a studio under orders from their own government. It was fiction, but it looked familiar. Too familiar. audiences left theaters with a chill. The story wasn't true, but it felt true, and in the age of paranoia, feeling often mattered more than fact. Pop culture had turned the moon hoax from a rumor into a myth, a modern legend where light, shadow, and lies could all live on the same reel of film. Because Hollywood doesn't just sell fantasy, it teaches us how to see it. And when the eye learns to doubt what's real on screen, the mind starts to doubt what's real at all. The lunar landing had been a broadcast. So was every film. And in the flicker between them, something essential shifted. The story of human triumph became a story about human trust, and that trust was starting to unravel. By the time the 1970s faded into the 1980s, America had changed. The optimism that once fueled rockets was burning out like the boosters that carried them. Watergate had revealed corruption at the highest level. The Pentagon Papers had shown that even wars could be built on lies. And a long, bitter decade of crisis left a question hanging in the air. If we couldn't trust the people in power, who could we trust? The moon, once a symbol of unity, became a reflection of division. Every crater, every photograph, every footprint was suddenly part of a larger argument. Not about science, but about belief. NASA had proof, photographs, samples, telemetry, but none of it mattered to those who had already lost faith. Because belief doesn't bend to evidence. It bends to emotion, to betrayal, to the quiet conviction that truth belongs to no one, and that every official story hides a darker one beneath. Across the country, the conspiracy spread slowly through tabloids, radio shows, photocopied newsletters passed from hand to hand like forbidden scripture. They called it research. But at its core, it was confession. A record of distrust in a world that felt increasingly dishonest. It wasn't about the moon anymore. It was about meaning, about control, about reclaiming power from the institutions that had taken it. And so disbelief became a kind of rebellion, a movement for those who refused to be fooled. Every hoax theory, every late-night argument wasn't just a rejection of NASA, it was a rejection of naivete. To doubt became to think. To question became to belong. And by the time the Cold War began to thaw, those voices were no longer isolated. They were building something, an identity, a culture of skepticism that would soon find a new home in a place far larger and far louder than any backyard conversation or basement radio, a place called the Internet. Once doubt was whispered, now it trends. The same questions that once lived in the margins of magazines and the corners of living rooms found a new home in the glow of computer screens. The Internet, a place built to share information, became the perfect machine for spreading uncertainty. In the 1990s and early 2000s, forums filled with grainy photos and shaky evidence. Low-resolution shadows, camera reflections, flag movements, analyzed frame by frame. Every pixel became a battlefield, and for many, the goal was no longer truth, but victory. Because online, belief isn't about proof, it's about belonging. The moon hoax wasn't just a story anymore. It was a symbol, a test of who you trusted, the experts or yourself. Social media poured gasoline on the fire. The algorithms didn't care what was true, only what was shared. And what spreads faster than outrage? Doubt. Soon, the moon landing conspiracy stood beside dozens of others, each feeding the same hunger, the need to feel awake in a world full of sleepers. To believe in a lie, after all, is still to believe in something, and in the chaos of the digital age, that can feel like a kind of clarity. But underneath the noise, the truth was still there, quiet, patient, unmoved. The footprints on the lunar surface, the retroreflectors still bouncing light from Earth, the silent hum of truth that needs no defense. Yet the echoes of disbelief remain, because once trust fractures, it never returns the same. The Internet didn't invent conspiracy. It amplified the human need that fuels it, the search for certainty in a world that feels uncertain. The moon is silent. It always has been. No wind, no sound, no movement. just footprints pressed into dust that will remain long after we are gone. They are still there. Proof, if you need it. But proof was never the problem, was it? Because the story of the moon landing was never just about rockets and astronauts. It was about faith. Faith in what we see, and in those who tell us what we see means something. And somewhere along the way, that faith began to fade. The greatest hoax was never filmed in a studio, never staged under lights or painted backdrops. It was born in the cracks between truth and trust, in the space where information overwhelms understanding. When people stopped believing the powerful, they started believing anyone who said the powerful were lying. And so, even a miracle, one of the rare moments when humanity looked beyond itself, became suspect. But maybe the moon landing isn't just a story of achievement. Maybe it's a mirror, showing us who we were and who we've become. A people so desperate to be certain, we've forgotten how to be curious. So quick to see deception, we forget that wonder can be real. The truth is simple. We went. We left our mark in the dust. And though the footprints remain unchanged, the story around them has never stopped shifting. Because truth doesn't live in the data or the image or even the evidence. It lives in what we choose to believe about ourselves. And that may be the most fragile thing of all. So perhaps the question was never, did we go, but what happened to us after we did? Because sometimes the real history worth uncovering isn't written on the surface of another world, but in the shadows of our own.